Hey guys, I'm Aaron from Geeky Development and welcome to part 3 of our free tvOS crash course. Now in the last part we dynamically set up all of our objects to change depending on which car we selected within our UI collection view. Now we're going to work with the image file within our detail view that displays our selected car, and we're going to be creating a mini image gallery. We're going to be adding 2 buttons, a next and a previous one. And when we press these, we go next or back, we're going to be using that to display the remaining images that we have set up in our project of our cars to create a kind of ever-changing image gallery. And that's going to work very dynamically, just like how the stats of the cars change when we select our cell. So let's jump straight into part 3 of our crash course. Okay then, so to utilize this mini image gallery we're going to be creating in our detail view, we're going to be using the remainder of the images that we added in for the cars. And how it's going to work is we're going to have 2 buttons. And each time we press these buttons, whether it's the next or previous button, we'll display the next or previous image in the sequence. Now there's some configurations that we need to do. As we only have 4 images on each of the cars, we can't allow the buttons to go beyond the amount of images that we have. We're also going to show an indicator to our user so they not only know what image they're currently on, but how many images are left within the sequence. So then we're first going to jump into our main.storyboard, where we need to add in some more objects now to control our mini image gallery that we're going to be creating. So we're going to have 2 buttons in. I'll call it next and back. So this is going to be our back button, and then this one's going to be our next button. We also want an indicator to kind of tell us which image we are on. So I'll just quickly copy and paste one of our labels we got here, and I'll just make it quite a bit smaller, and I'll place that between the 2 buttons. There we go. So I'll rename this one. As we're going to be on the first image in the sequence anyway, this is going to be 1 of 4, as we only have 4 images all together. So then, we're going to select all of these and I'll center them to the rest of our labels here, and I'll select all of them and then center them to our image view, which will just go to the top here. There we go. Okay then, so we've now got those all in. We need to create some actions and outlets for these 3 new objects. So select the files owner and bring up the assistant editor. And I'm going to scroll to the top to start with our outlets. Okay, for our objects. Now we're also going to need not only an outlet for the label, obviously displaying what number image we're on, but we're going to need outlets for the buttons. Now the reason is, obviously when we get to that 4th image, we need to disable the next button, so it won't allow us to go to the 5th image that we don't have. The same goes for our back button. When we go to keep going back to our first image, we need to disable it so it doesn't go into like the minus numbers. So we need outlets on it to enable and disable that button at any given point. Okay then, so let's start with the first label then, and I simply call this one our label count. So it's going to count what number we're on. When we start with our back button as the next outlet, I'll call this back outlet, and then I'll call this one, our next one, our next outlet. There we go. So we've got those in, and we're going to now scroll down to the bottom. So after our warning memory here, we'll space this section out. And this is where we're now going to add in our actions. So let's start with our next button. So drag and drop that in. Make sure we change the connection from outlet to action. And I'll simply name it next and add that in. Something you need to make sure that you're aware of when you're creating your actions for your buttons, they're a lot different to how you would create them from a normal iPhone app. Whereas before we would have had touch up or touch up inside or touch down, anything like that. The event for tvOS is primary action trigger. This is again because there's only one way to interact with it, and that's with the remote. So I'll name this one back and create that as well. Okay, so we got those in. We're now going to close the assistant editor, go back to our standard editor, and then jump into our detail view controller. So the first thing we're going to configure before we change the images is to make sure that when we're pressing the next and back button, that we're also changing the indicator within our label. Now to change that indicator, we need to use basically an int. An int which is going to hold a value of the number to be displayed within that label count. So we can now add in, just after our button outlets, a new variable. Now this one's going to be our image int, and that's going to equal the number 0. Now the reason it's equaling the number 0 is so it knows it's equaling a value of a number, so that variable becomes an int. What we're going to do then is scroll down to the bottom now, to the bottom of the last statement within our view did load. And here, when the view loads up for the first time, obviously when it does what it does anyway, which is single out what image is being displayed within our detail view image and displays the car stats, it's also going to get our image int and equal it to the number 1. Because the number 1 is the default number of the image we're going to be displaying. It's then going to get our label count.text and equal that to a string. Now, placing two brackets, the string it's going to have in it is going to equal our image int. So that means our label.text will then equal the number 1. So if I go to build and run, you'll then see that label equals the number within our image int of the number 1. But that's not what we want. We want it to say 1 of 4. And how do we do that? Well, we add on additional information to the string. So where it's equaling that, we then also do space plus space an additional string. So we add an additional string to the string which is holding our int. And then within it, we do 4 or over 4 there. So when we build and run this time, you then see it displays a little differently. It now says 1 over 4. But what we want to do now then is make sure that when we press the next button or the back button, that it then changes the indication within that label. So scroll down now to where we have our buttons. We're going to start with our next button. And what it's going to do is first it's going to get our image int and then plus equals 1 every time we press that next button. And then it's going to get our label count.text to equal our string, again just like how we set it up in the view did load, of our image int plus our string of over 4. So if we build and run now, you can see that when we press the next button, it adds 1 to the int and displays it in the same way, but the int's going to have a different value. So 2, 3, 4. There we go. And we need to repeat the process in our back button. But the only difference is, rather than plussing, it's going to be taking 1 away. So if we build and run once more, you will then see that you'll start to take it away. So again, we select any one, we can go up, and then we can go down. So we've got the indication now all set up. What we don't have is the ability to, when we switch to the second one, it doesn't really do anything for our images. So we've got that indication set up, we know it's working. Now let's move on to our images. So every time we press the next or back button, we need to change the image in the sequence that we're displaying. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is set up a function statement underneath all of those. So we type out func, and I'll call this image gallery. Place in our 2 brackets there, and then our parentheses brackets, and press enter. So this function statement now is going to hold all the data for our mini image gallery. And it's going to work very similar to how we had set up our if statements of our car stats, but it's not going to be as confusing or as large. So what I'm going to do then is let's work with our first one, our Aston Martin. So if, now this time, as we've done before, we've equaled the stats depending on what image has been displayed. Now we can't do this with the mini image gallery. We can't say if our image equals Aston1.jpg, then display Aston Martin JPEG 2 and so on, because the image is always going to change. So what we need to do is make sure it equals something else within the view, and that something else is going to be the title of the car name in that label. So we get if our car name.text is equal to the string Aston Martin, which I believe it is the Vanquish. If it equals that, then perform what we place in between these brackets. And what it's going to do is get our detail image view dot image. Now this is a very smart way of doing this. Gets our detail image dot image there to equal a UI image and the name there. And this is the smart thing about it. The image is going to equal, rather than saying equal Aston2.jpg, it's going to equal Aston. Now again, this is a smart thing. / there are two brackets, our image int dot JPEG. Now you may be thinking, what does this mean? I don't understand this. So let me just get rid of that last bracket there. What this does is it gets our image named equal in Aston, then our image int, which these, the / there and the two brackets, hold that int within it, whatever that number is, .jpg. And obviously that image int number is going to change depending on whether we press the next or back button. So when we press the next button for the first time, it makes the image int equal 2, which then when it reads this, it will then get our Aston Martin image int, which will be the number 2 at that point, .jpg, which that again is really smart. But at the moment, when we press the buttons, it can't trigger this function statement because there's nothing linking it to it. So in the next button here, we're going to set it up now to every time we press the next button, it triggers that function statement. So we do self.image gallery. And that simply triggers that function statement every time we press one of these buttons, and if I paste it in our back button there. So if you go to build and run now, you can see how smart it is and how we work with it displaying that image. So if I move it over to the side here so you can clearly see, move the project over a little bit more. There we go. So we are currently on our first image by default, and the image int is currently selected to 1. When we press the next button, when I release it, it's going to change the image int to 2. At the same time, it triggers our image gallery function statement there, which if the car name equals Aston Martin Vanquish, then it's going to change the detail image to display our Aston, whatever the image int is, .jpg, which at this point the image is going to change to 2. So as I press next there and change it to 2, it also changes the image because that equals the file name. I can go to 3 and 4. So every time I press it, I'm changing the image int, and it's changing while it equals the image within the image view, thus creating our mini image gallery. And I can go back and it changes itself. And that's all down to because, again, the file names are named Aston 1, Aston 2, Aston 3, Aston 4, the Audi is Audi 1, 2, 3, 4, the BMW is 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if you do go to add in additional images, make sure that they say in the same sequence, that you will add number 5, 6, 7, 8 and so on and so on. But the problem we got at the moment is once I get to 4, I can also press it again to 5, which has no image to display, and again to 0, which has no image to display. So we need now to basically to have the ability to handle it to stop at 4 and stop at 1. So in the same function statement here, I'm going to space it out a little bit further down so we can see this. So before we go on to add the rest of the other cars, we're going to set up our buttons. So this time we do if our image int is equal to 1. So if the image int equals to 1, we only want our next button to be able to be pressed. So our back button needs to be disabled. So our back outlet dot enabled is going to equal false. That means it will disable the button, but it's still visible on the screen. It doesn't really look good. So what we're going to do, we're going to fade out the alpha of it as well. So our back outlet dot alpha is going to equal 0.25, which is a quarter of its transparency. So before we build and run and see the main differences and how it looks, you got to remember this is only triggered when the int equals 1, when this function gets triggered. So I'm going to quickly copy that and paste it in the view did load just after where we set our image int to 1 and it to display in our label. So by default, when we build and run now, you'll then see that the back button is going to be disabled. So there we go. I cannot select on it. It's disabled and we faded out the alpha. Now this also happens when the image int equals 1 in the function statement. That's for when we've gone to 2, 3, 4 and then we're coming back. So what we're going to do now then is create a second one, but this time if the image int equals 2. So if it equals 2, then we're going to set this back to true, and then the alpha is going to go back to 1. So if I build and run now, you'll see that when we come away from the int being 1, it changes the back button. So if I press 2, the back button then becomes alive. I go back and it's disabled it. 2, back. So I can no longer, as you see I'm clicking, go below the number 1. So all that's left to do now is configure the next button to do the same to not allow us to go above the number 4. So we've got that set up. I'll then paste in 2 more for when we're on the number 3 and when we're on the number 4. So number 3 and number 4 need to work in reverse to how number 1 and 2 do. So this is going to work on our next outlet. So when it simply gets to 4, we wanted to disable the next button and set the alpha to 0.25. Then once it gets to 3, we then need to bring it back to life. So I paste it in there. We're going to build and run now and see exactly how it works. So we just kind of reversed it on the last 2. From rather than being the back button, it's done the next button. So by default, the back button's disabled. We press next. We see the next car. Go to number 3, we see the next car. But as we go to number 4, the next button's now disabled. And then when we go back to number 3, it re-enables the next button and we go back. So we've now capped it off. We can no longer go any further than the number 4 or the number 1, creating our little mini image gallery. But as it stands, this is only working on the Aston Martin Vanquish. For example, in the Audi, the buttons stop because that's what we set them to do, but we don't have any configuration for the Audi. So we're going to copy now this, and we need 8 all together. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then just like we've done before, we need to change the car it displays. So this is our Audi R8. And again, changing what image it's displaying as in our Audi. Our next one is our BMW i8. And again, making sure it changes our BMW. And again, if you do add additional images, or if you're going to add different types of categories, let's say you're creating a dog application, remember when you're creating your little mini image gallery that you name the image files like image1.jpg or .png, whatever format you're using, image2. Remember to have that image name within it. They're all named the same, just the number changes. So you can work it off the int. So we've got the BMW i8 in there. We need the Bugatti Veyron. I'll quickly copy that and paste that in. So we got the i8, we got the Bugatti Veyron. We need the Ferrari, which is the 488. Paste that in. Next is the Lamborghini. which is the Lamborghini Huracan, I believe. Making sure I spell them all correctly because, again, it does work off the car name. And then the last two, we've got the Mclaren P1. And then last but not least, we have the Mercedes GT. GT there. Copy that and paste that in. So we're going to test them all out now to make sure that we got all the file names spelled correctly and that they're all working perfectly. So if I bring it back in, so we've already done the Aston Martin. We know that works when we change the images. So let's try the Audi. So next, all the images are working perfect. We'll test out the BMW i8. Now that one's not working perfect, and we'll quickly go see what's going on. So BMW i8, have we got the name spelled correctly? It's the lowercase I. So there we go, making sure that if you're using uppercase and lowercase, that may cause a problem. So just double check it. So BMW there. You can see there, so it is case sensitive, so remember that. The BMW now works. The Bugatti. There we go, working perfect, this image gallery. And then we got the Ferrari 488. Perfect. Lamborghini Huracan. Perfect again. McLaren P1. Perfect. And finally the Mercedes GT. There we go. Each image, not only, or each cell that we select, changes the stats and the image being displayed within the image view, but we also now have this mini image gallery all set up. So not only can we learn more about the cars with the different stats, but we can also view different images of that exact car. So no matter what we simply select, we can then see more about it, which we're adding more data. And again, it kind of single out what we currently viewing, whether it's the Aston Martin Vanquish, sets up the stats, sets up the mini image gallery. So all the data is dynamically changing for our user. So there we go. Our application is starting to look like a really full-featured app. And if you'd like to take your tvOS development to the next stage, make sure you check out our full-featured development course. Links for that will be down below. But until then, we'll see you in part 4, where we'll be creating custom buttons, adding our very own images to these buttons, and taking a look at Apple's brand new focused view feature that comes native to tvOS applications. So until then, I'll see you all in part 4, so see you soon.